Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Myriam, and her name is Nada. And together we are hosting this interview series called Public History in Arts. We're doing this in collaboration with the University of Luxembourg, and we're very, very happy today to be hosting Patrice Green with us. Hi, Patrice. I'm going to start the introduction by telling people a bit more about Patrice for those who don't know her, and then Nada will kick off starting with the questions. So Patrice is the curator for African American and African Diasporic collections at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute's Schlesinger Library on the history of women in America. Green holds master's degrees in public history and library and information science from the University of South Carolina, with training in museums and material culture, historic preservation and archives, and preservation management. Her interests include archival representation, knowledge justice, and Black history and culture. Additionally, her work has allowed her to develop and steward collections that center Black life, enhance critical teaching and learning experiences, and cultivate Black memory. Welcome, Patrice. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Okay, I can kick us start with like first things first. I like to do that. I think it sets the tone for the interview. So my first question is, Patrice, how do you think about public history? Is it like a history making, as in like history of the future, or is it like history narration, as in a place to afford agency to subjects that otherwise are not afforded such agency?
I think it's a combination of both, and the way it's progressed over the last, I don't know, 100 years. I say 100 lightly for the US. In the US, it was mostly more about memorialization, remembering, not letting go of history. The Mount Vernon, I think it's the Mount Vernon Ladies Society or something like that, was really kind of the crux of what we know as like the historic preservation movement here in the US. Just trying to remember George Washington, the land he lived on, all that other good stuff. And it was really about enshrining this kind of very narrative memory just within the history of the US. And now that we have continued to face some kind of different or critical narratives about how history actually does or doesn't progress. It's not linear, right? It's still quite narrative because we're still gathering the stories and really interpreting and understanding the stories of marginalized people a lot better at this moment, even though there's a whole thing right now trying to not do that. But we won't get into that today. Now there is an effort to really consider the parts of history that we've been missing. And public history really helps us do that more fully. And I love that idea about projecting into the future, like what do we think is going to be important for us to know? And that's something I ask students when we're talking about archives. What do you think is going to happen with your stuff 50 years from now? Or how would people have found out information about you 50 years ago? So I hope that answers a little bit, but it's quite convoluted. I know it's a cop-out to say it's history for the public, but I think it's also bringing to light the parts of our lives that touch history and that perpetuate the lifestyles that we have. It affects everything from, housing and policy and all of these other things. So it's important to be able to kind of encapsulate that into a variety of narratives that help us understand ourselves a bit better.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you. And I think this
introduction.
Yeah, this is really nice, and I could then dig in a bit more personally for you, because as I read your bio to the viewers, I was also thinking this girl has two masters, one in library and information sciences and the other in public history. What brought you to public history? It's usually two different worlds. Like the people who sit in the archives are different from the people who go speak to people. What brought you in between these? What did you think you wanted from public history when you pursued public history?
That's so interesting that you say that they're the two different worlds, because to me, there has been the history and there has been the library science, but the archives bring them together. So I always think of them as one and the same. Now with technical services, there is a type of person like, I'm gonna sit and count and maybe not talk to people, but out the history has progressed or not progressed. I was looking at different programs when I finished my undergrad in English, and I didn't want to teach. I didn't want to go to law school, and I didn't want to be a journalist. Those were like the three. And I was just like, not focused to be like a fiction writer at the time. Would love to do that at some point, but we're gonna have to see. And I thought about a class that I had in high school called Community Studies, led by our history teacher, Meredith Sears, and another teacher who has now passed, Rhonda Baldwin. And so much about our little small town of Roanoke, Alabama. We walked around at different sites, and I didn't know what we were doing was public history because we just called it community studies. But it was just so interesting to go around our little small town because everything was close enough by that we could just walk there. It's like, oh, this is where the old post office used to be. There's a bomb shelter in the basement, World War II era. And then there's with like barrels of like steel crackers and old water still in there. I hope somebody runs some experiments on those one day just to see what happens. And then seeing like the place where cotton used to be weighed in the town center, and seeing where the last standing outhouse is at First Baptist Church on Briley Street. It's a Black Baptist church in Roanoke. Just seeing these different spaces and thinking about my grandfather who grew up there, and it's like these are the things that he has been part of his entire life, and really connecting to that. So I was just like, oh, this is very cool. I would love to pursue a career that's part of that. And then trying to figure out, I also like the stuff, and I didn't know how to work with the stuff per se. I'm like, oh, there's all these old log books in the old museum in Roanoke. It used to be the post office, the one I was talking about with the bomb shelter in the basement. And I was just like, oh, there's all these interesting stuff. There are these, they call them the Ella Smith doll. It's like an indestructible doll, very famous in Roanoke. And there's all these really, really cool pieces of history just lying around. I was interested in the physical items, the furniture, the dolls, the ephemera, but also the paper things, the books, what people were reading or writing down. And yes, it was just log books from a grocery store. I think that was in town. It's like just ordering things to keep people fed. But I was like, this is very interesting. And for people who do food studies, for people who do economic history, those types of archival collections help us trace how we have, thrived or not thrived economically over the last, however many years here in the US. So I thought that was really interesting. And I saw a couple of programs that had public history, and that allowed me to think a little bit more broadly about, oh, I don't have to just sit in a classroom and take notes, because I was just like, that's great and all, but I want to do other things, field work, if you will. So I saw the program at the University of South Carolina. There was the dual program with public history and library and information science. It was kind of tied together with the archives management program. It's not as thriving now as it was, but hopefully there will be a comeback. And it was like, it seemed like it was perfect for me. It wasn't like too far from home. And it was great. So I was just like, I think I'll do that because I can't choose to this day. So it's been great ever since. It's really opened up my career possibilities.
Well, that's nice. That's really inspiring. I hope the people who are hearing this who are still questioning themselves about not being able to choose, you don't have to choose. Like the categories that we put ourselves in or that the system wants us to be in are so restrictive at some point, and you really have to do what makes you feel fulfilled. Like you wanted to do work with people, and that was it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this can be used as a segue to my next question, which is, okay, we're studying history, but we're not studying history, we're studying public history. So it's not history in the traditional way. How do you approach public history in a way that makes it relevant to the public? Or let me rephrase, like how do you let the people of the community understand how relevant this is to their present day, and not just if they are academic or geeks or interested in something in particular?
Yeah, this is the part where archives come in, and other collections too, but I can't move a giant oak sideboard around the county with me. But this is where archives really come in, and help people engage in storytelling alongside you. We talk in public history about shared authority, in museums, which shared is a strong word for a lot of large institutions as they tend to control the narrative. But for me and other people who work with archival collections, it's really about recovering the stories that have kind of been silenced. We talk about archival silences all the time. So when you're trying to engage with community members, there's a really special thing about being able to say, oh my gosh, there's this photo album from like the late 1800s, early 1900s in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or in this, well, I'm thinking of one photo album we have about this, mixed race family that lived in like the Nantucket kind of area. And it's really interesting, even if we don't know those specific people, even if there's not captions of them, we see the places where they lived, the land they owned, the places they visited. And when I talk to Black people in Cambridge or in other parts of, the country, I can say this is like a beautiful photo album. This is a history of photography, but also a history of Black people and Blackness and race, kind of in New England at the turn of the century. But there are a lot of these places in these photographs in the backgrounds, and these places still exist, and people latch on to that. They're just like, oh, I used to go on vacation there with my parents. I used to go to Martha's Vineyard. I personally can't relate. I was a public school kid. Like I did not have Martha's Vineyard money or anything like that. But even other parts of like the greater Boston area, Roxbury, Dorchester, these are places that are very concentrated, Black people, Dominicans, Haitians, just very, very racially diverse in a very awesome way. And also that's where the good food is. And there's this way that we can connect people to their history if they get a chance to see just like, oh my gosh, that building has been there since 1860. Like it's great. But also people then start to remember, especially since I work with things that are more in the 20th century. And since a lot of my training was in the South and I'm from the South, that's where my mind tends to go. I can show pictures of like downtown areas or something like that. And you can have a person who's maybe my grandparents' age, rest their soul, so maybe in their 70s or something like that. It's like, that was a really interesting lunch counter, and I wasn't allowed to go in there when I was a kid. Um, or this was a really important, amusement park or zoo, but because I was Black or because I was mixed or anything like that, I was only allowed to go on like Tuesdays after 5 p.m. or something like that. So there are those temporal and physical color lines in different places. And public history brings us to reality very quickly, and it helps us not romanticize things so much, because people like to talk a lot about, especially in the civil rights movement, how long ago that was and all this other stuff. And it's like, I don't know, my mom's birth certificate, list her as a kind of derogatory term for Black people as her race, right? Not the worst term, but still a derogatory term. And that's just my mom. She was born in 1967. Right? This was yesterday in terms of people who study history. So public history really does, and though that archives piece helps us engage with people, connect with them, and say, this is your history too. It's really hard to connect with people who are studying, Greek antiquities, even though that would be amazing, right? I don't speak Greek though. But it's a little bit easier if you say, hey, I have this this journal from a lady that lived on this street in 1950. Your parents also lived there. Can you tell me a little bit more about that street? And that brings us a little more into the world of oral history as well. But that's how we can make those connections. And I have to acknowledge my own positionality, even though I am dark-skinned Black woman from the South, from not like a rich part of the nation. But also I work at this Ivy League institution. So when I talk about community engagement, I try to be very careful with that. Harvard is, taking a bit of a stand right now in terms of fighting back against really bad historic narratives, but also it's Harvard, right? We're not exactly raging against the machine here. So it's important to acknowledge those and to not parachute into communities and say, hi, we're Harvard, we're the white hero, we're going to help you. It's like, it's not my job to do that, but it is my job to say, oh my gosh, you lived here for 57 years. I would love to know your story.
That's beautiful. Maybe that also could start connecting us to when do we work with arts to speak about history. When you were talking about connecting people to their own stories with the bigger picture, it also gives a lot of the emotional part of what people are feeling, what people felt about this past, how they connected emotionally with their stories on a personal level, on the family level, maybe a bit bigger in the neighborhood, and then you connect to the bigger history. How do you embrace this emotional part in the work that you're doing with the community?
So this is actually very tough for me, right? On a personal level, but also professionally, I'm getting a lot better at it, right? It takes work. But personally, I, grew up in a household on a farm raised by my grandparents. And I come from a military family. Not a lot of time for emotions. So like not allowed, no crying, fix your face, don't have an attitude, all those different things. When I'm going into a community, or for the most part, if I'm just attending like an event that's held by a community, my job there is to listen and to be as empathetic as possible, because I'm still, this has been a whole thing for me that I'm even doing for the public historians and artists out there who are listening. I'm in therapy, right? To be able to deal with own personal things, but I'm realizing that it's helpful for my professional life as well. And when I am in a community and people want to, talk about things that are very emotionally charged, or people who, something we talked about at NCPH this year was when locals resist a narrative that we're trying to project onto them. Something that said a lot is just like, oh, this city or county or whatever was never part of the civil rights movement. And when you go, oh, here, yes, you were, here's the research, they're just like, well, it didn't happen that way. That's not me. Being able to deal with those contradictions without being angry or without being insulted because I'm the expert, right? I did the research. That doesn't matter, right? It's about what the people who grew up there are thinking about, and really leaning into allowing people to express themselves is really important. The emotion part when it comes to community is less about me and more about others. But as a curator, I deal a lot with donors who are going through a lot of different things. A lot of donors are, maybe they're nearing the end of their life. They're like, I just want to, place my things somewhere they're going to be taken care of. I, was a journalist, or I did these wonderful things, or I was an activist for all these years. I have these journals, these letters, this archive of organizing, and I really just want it to go somewhere safe. I don't want it to be thrown away. Being able to provide comfort to people who are thinking about, leaving their earthly possessions behind is a lot. And it's emotionally taxing for me. There have been like a couple donors I have cried on a Zoom call with as we're discussing their collections, because it's not always about, I have this nice house and I'm just making sure things are settled before I transition from this mortal coil. Sometimes it's about, I walked in, I found my mother deceased in her, state sanctioned housing, and they're giving us 7 days to get all of her stuff out. Or it's My family couldn't afford to keep our home. It was foreclosed on. We had to move our things quickly to a storage locker. We couldn't keep up with the fees on the storage locker. It got sold, and now some book dealer somewhere is selling my family's photo albums for $5,000 a pop. That is really, really, really difficult to deal with. And one specific example, there's a beautiful photo album slash artist book slash scrapbook situation from a woman named Myrtle Coles, and it's at Penn State. So I acquired this book when I was working there. And it was about, it was for like her husband's 50th birthday or something. I may be wrong on that age. But it was beautifully done. It was very cute. There were pictures and she had drawings in there. But we purchased that, and her family, had a connection to slavery and showing their path to freedom. Just a wonderful history. A family member from that family called my office and said, "Hey, one of my grandkids was, playing around on the internet, and they saw this photo album that you have. Can you tell me more about how you got that and why you have my family's history?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's really hard." Because as a profession, curatorial work has always been about taking, and it is hard to acknowledge that for a lot of people. Not for me, but I'm just like, okay. But for me to deal with that in my first curatorial role, I was like, oh, I'm gonna call these people and give them the respect they deserve, and say, hey, we purchased this. This was on sale from a book dealer. I don't know where the dealer originally acquired it, but they did the provenance research. And it was an extensive album, beautifully done. But what we did, because we couldn't, just give it to the people, unfortunately, we couldn't give it to the family. I wish we could have repatriated it, but it's a state institution. They're not going to do that after they spent money on it. What we did was we were like, okay, so we're just going to go ahead and do like high density scan TIFFs, for us to send to this family, fully described, fully digitized and available, sent the files to them. And if they ever can't find it, they can ask Penn State again anytime, free of charge. Because that is their family's history, and we owe that to them, at least. It was the least I could do. But I did have a lovely conversation with the family. Turns out they were from South Carolina, living in South Carolina at the time, and we chatted for a while. The emotional toll is quite extensive. And then sometimes there are people who are like, hey, I'm dying of cancer. I need you to help me place my collections. So it can be really tough. And for community members, it's more on the side of, hey, this building has been part of our community for 40 years. Somebody's coming to bulldoze it. What can we do? And how do we stop this? So it can be really, really difficult. I've talked a lot, but yes. Continue.
That's the point. We need you to talk a lot. Maybe I can ask a more specific question about the recent exhibition, Rhyme, Rhythm, and Resistance. I love the title, by the way. And since Myriam was talking about art, I didn't know about the exhibition when it was going. If I had known, maybe I could have visited since it's within proximity. But I would like you to tell us more about it, how the idea for this came, and how do you see this enriching and empowering? I don't like the word empowering, but like enriching and benefiting the public.
Yeah. So for me, I'll be honest and just say this was my first, big exhibition, even though it's like the gallery space for the Schlesinger Library is quite small, but it was my first big exhibition, and something I had to contend with was working with a lot of different shareholders and not shareholders, good Lord, my brain is fried, stakeholders who are also working on the exhibition. So people at the print shop and people who are trying to get scans and copies of things that we may need, photographers, all of this stuff. So for the original idea of the exhibition, it was actually going to be about protest songs, protest music in general. And because I am a music person, I was just like, okay, I think I can be the lead curator on this one. But as I looked through the collections, and I was still getting to know the collections at the time, as I had just started working there not too long before, I was like, oh, we have really rich collections in other forms of performing arts. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. So poetry, theater performance, but also, of course, music, protest. And I thought the whole point of the existence of, the Schlesinger Library and the Radcliffe Institute, it was a women's, kind of a women's college. It was one of the Seven Sisters, I think Wellesley and all those other schools. And the whole point was for the inclusivity of women, white women at first, of course, but the inclusivity of women. And as we've grown as an institution and as a library, we've built collections around these different ideals of resistance. And resistance is sometimes a stretch for what some of the older activists at the time were doing. But when it comes to women's freedoms and women's access to literal life, that was really important for us to explore with this exhibition. But it was also important for me to explore how we use art, performing arts, music to express dissent for different things, and how when it comes to women or femme-presenting people, feminized people, anytime you express emotion, it is not taken seriously. So if you do it dramatically through an art, it still may not be taken as seriously, but it will be remembered, and it will be, it will be a way to express yourself. So that was the main goal, is to say, hey, we've been oppressed for as long as there have been women and men. So let's think about how our kind of concerns may or may not have been taken seriously, and explore some of the poems, the poetry, and the music, the art, all that kind of stuff that examines what that looks like. Most of it's 20th century kind of stuff, of course, but it was quite fun to look through the materials and see.
I'm sure it was. And now that you're telling us a bit more in detail, I'm like, we needed to see this. Can you maybe give us a bit? Because also when we talk about artistic mediums to present some of the research that we do as academics, it also very much depends on the public's reception of it. Either they take us seriously, or they go like, meh, it's art. So how was the public's reaction to the exhibition? If you
I
could
think
give
they
us a bit of
actually,
a...
no, I think it was, well, I know it was actually quite well received. Like, we got a lot of good commentary from it. The one of the school's kind of outlets did a review of the exhibit right before it went down, which I also have thoughts about, but that's a whole other thing. And it was well received because it was set up a little differently than we normally do exhibits in that space. A lot of the poems that we decided to display, I wanted to just put the originals in like cases, and people can just take time to look at them. But the exhibition, not coordinator, I forget his name, but well, not his name, but Joe, he's our exhibits guy. He does the fabrication, he's the artist, he does incredible work. He was just like, that's boring. And at first I was offended because as an archives person, I will happily look at pieces of paper in cases. But he was just like, we want to be able to have people experience these poems. So he sent me just some mock-ups, and we decided on like hanging poems from the ceiling. And when people were standing in the space and reading, or sitting on the little benches we provided, I was like, oh, people are having like a little moment of communion and are really experiencing what these women are talking about in their poetry, and really taking a moment to feel them. Because poetry is meant to be read aloud, right? But this is what we can provide in the space that we have. So it was really powerful in that way. And I was like, you know what? You were right, Joe. This was great. So that's why we love artists, because they have a different perspective on what we can do. And then also, there was like this moment of photography in the exhibit. June Jordan, wonderful poet, of course, an activist, went down to Mississippi to hang out with Fannie Lou Hamer, who here in the States was a civil and voters' rights activist. And she was beaten severely after she registered to vote. And when she went back to the plantation that she worked on, she wasn't enslaved. This was past that, but she was still working and keeping the books at a plantation. The person running the plantation was just like, you need to go unregister or you have no job here. So same kind of thing. She didn't have a job there regardless afterwards, but still she faced a lot of, different hardship, and she also didn't really fit in with respectability politics as we know it, this whole talented tenth of Black people. So she was like, you know what, I'm still going to fight for the rights of Black people here in Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta, especially also Black farmers, which I thought was very cool. But June Jordan goes to visit Fannie Lou Hamer, and while she's there, she takes all these gorgeous photos of just Mississippi. And Mississippi is not a place that ranks high in people's minds here, even though, I still have family who lives there. And it is just a place that has been severely, neglected, not only by the federal government, but it has been ruined a lot by white supremacy. So June Jordan going down there and just taking these photos. There was also a photojournalist with her, and seeing these photos of Black people in Mississippi just being was beautiful. So that moment was also pretty great for me. But yeah, it's been interesting to see the different ways that people have received the exhibits. Like, I didn't really expect people to really care that much because, and it's an exhibit at a library at an institution, right? But it told a great story, and I'm hoping that, the digital exhibit can also provide context for people who weren't able to see it.
When does the digital exhibit come out, or is it already up?
Oh, it's already up. And by digital exhibit, I mean more so digital component. So it does have the materials, or at least some of the materials that were there. We did a lot of photography to be able to put it on the exhibit's website so people could see, and the exhibit labels are up there, lots of explanations, all that good stuff. So that's available still and probably will be in perpetuity.
Perfect. I think it's important to share that with people watching the video. Like, it should be in the description or something. Okay, I think it's important to address the big elephant in the room, and to talk about how do you see your work engaging and evolving with the public in the current political climate in the US.
Yeah, so we had this panel earlier this year with a thing I was doing through the Rare Book School, or I think it was last year actually. And one of the panelists, Shakti Castro, reminded us of this phrase, the work is the work. So for us at the Schlesinger Library, and for me especially, the work is indeed the work. I am careful about, and I hate to say this, but I am being careful about how I present myself online. But even I still do share things. I'm still very much, trying to be an advocate for, good critical narratives of American history and world history, especially history of the Global South, which critiquing the Global South is now like the thing to do in scholarship, because the Global South is not one big place, right? But it is important for us to not comply in advance, to not roll over, and to really continue fighting these entrenched narratives that have been part of American history for the longest time. There is a scholar, and she's an independent scholar on social media, usually on Instagram, named Sunny Day Jones, and she has this wonderful little explainer video about this book called Slave in a Box, talking about the life of Aunt Jemima on the syrup bottles, that kind of thing like that. And she just reminds the audience that this very romanticized idea of the 1950s housewife, I've been thinking about trad wife things a lot. This 1950s housewife, that never existed. It was a fantasy. And the food industry shows us that after the abolition of slavery, and then we get into after, World War I and going into World War II, Black women are understanding that I don't have to work in domestic labor for white households anymore. I don't have to do that with my time. I can do something else, start my own business if I'm able. And if I'm not able, I leave the South in the Great Migration and go north, right? But there is this development in the food industry. You can hear my cat scratching. I'm so sorry. In the food industry, where they're just like, oh, Black women are not going to work for us anymore. Even though there was even like a movement on vagrancy laws that was just like, Black women, you legally have to go work for these white women in their households because they can't handle all their work on their own. Bingo. So there's this the food industry goes more and more towards convenience meals, preservatives. Some good things come out of that movement, right? We get the FDA, we get and this is, a long time coming, so like more in the turn of the century, but we get the FDA, we get good things, which is now allegedly being dismantled. I don't know what's happening. But there's just a lot of different things that come to light. And it's just like, okay, well, I don't have this person who works for me for pennies anymore. So now I have to be the Campbell soup person. And I'm just going to make my entire life revolve around not only this image, but also this consumerism, this I work really hard all day as a housewife. And I need to be able to show that and also wear heels and makeup to the grocery store. It's a whole mess, right? So white women, they're also not having a good time at this time, right? But their job is to uphold white supremacy. It's the 50s, there's McCarthyism, everybody's spying on each other and calling each other communists, and trying to get people, sent to prison or sent away. And that in no way reflects anything that's happening literally at this moment. But it is just this fantasy of these histories. And it has been that way since we've gotten here. And we do a lot of that with the way we talk about race, nail painters, the history of white people, talking about how whiteness came to be whiteness in America. And if you see old images of, Irish people in the States, they painted them Black or they drew them Black with my skin color because they were like, we need somebody to be less white. Yeah, it's so entrenched and ingrained in everything that we do in this country. So it is really, really important for us to be willing to interrogate that. And I do that by purchasing collections and doing instruction that allows people to get a little bit more, get uncomfy, but a little bit more comfortable with facing reality.
Wow.
Thank you, Patrice.
Fingers
You've been
crossed.
doing great work, and I love that we're ending this interview on a very good note of saying we will continue doing what we do. We will continue questioning things because this is literally our job. And even as we navigate this uncertain times, we still have a lot to say, and this is the day-to-day life for us as individuals and also for us being in these positions. We have been working in these positions for a reason, and we have to make the best of it, regardless of the circumstances, and maybe also even more so because of the circumstances. This was a lovely interview. Thank you everyone who was watching. We'll keep you posted. We'll try and put the links to what Patrice mentioned from the show, from the other artists that she spoke about, and also of our upcoming videos and interviews. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye.